So this is what we talked about last week. This was the premise for this series. We're going to be talking about idolatry and relationships for a couple weeks. This is the premise that I want to work with, and we're going to kind of play off of these ideas in every discussion for this series. We idolize people in three ways: either by worshiping them for who they are. We think that they're these amazing people. We have we hero worship. We have these idols of people that we really respect. We do that, or we worship who we want them to be. So I've got an idea of, this is what my parent should be. This is what a good parent is. This is what a good teacher is. This is what a good, whatever. And because that person doesn't live up to that expectation, I idolize this idea of who they are. And then finally, we idolize them by defining their worth by our own needs. We talked about how we can value our parents for the rides they give and not necessarily value who our parents are to us. And my parents pay my phone bill and stuff like that, but I don't really appreciate them for who they are. So that was kind of where we camped out last week. And by the way, and then we said this. Let me go over this real quick. We think our parents are exceptional or amazing parents. We think they're flawless. Probably not most of you in this room, but we can idolize our parents when we make them or their rules more important than God and His. Or we can believe that they're failures, where we idolize an ideal of who we want them to be, and so we're unwilling to follow the rules and the principles that they have for us, or we believe, again, that they exist for us. By the way, if you guys think very highly of your parents, that's fantastic. What I want you guys to recognize is not that, I'm not trying to tell you that you should be like, no, you're not perfect. You should recognize that your parents are human, they're capable of failure, and so you should be thankful for the fact that they're a great role model, but don't expect them to be absolutely perfect. If you're on the other side of that and you have a poor relationship with your parents or one of your parents, you find yourself often fighting with them. I want you guys to recognize that God has given your parents specifically for instruction and growth, and learn how to submit when they're being unfair, even when they're being unfair. So that's where we were last week. We're going to continue this discussion tonight, but we're going to move on to teachers and authority figures. Teachers and authority figures. So how do we practice idolatry when it comes to our teachers? And by the way, how many of you guys are homeschooled? You see my homeschoolers? This conversation is a little more geared toward public school students, but there's plenty of stuff in here for you too, so please don't tune me out. So I want to start out tonight by asking you guys a question. Have you ever had a teacher who really meant something to you, or who influenced you very deeply? So take a minute, think about that. Have you ever had a teacher who, maybe for you homeschoolers it was like your learn co-op teacher, who really meant something to you or who influenced you very deeply? All right? Take a minute, think about that. Yeah, we can do the Jeopardy thing. Now, tell me, what was it about that teacher that made them so influential to you? Give me something that made them really influential to you. Judith, go ahead.
He was funny and he connected with the class.
Okay, right. So he was humorous, he had a good sense of humor, and he really connected with the class. Cool, give me some more. What was it about your teacher that made them so influential? Yep. Yeah. They like to pick on you.
I just like to pick on, so
Okay. Alright, so everybody, before Grant leaves, give him some punches before he goes. Even though it's not his birthday. So, Grant, you appreciated the fact that the teacher was comfortable to tease you a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Give me some more. Other things. Alex.
He kind of went beyond being a teacher and became someone who kind of would teach you life skills instead of...
Okay. Yeah, so his influence wasn't necessarily just in the material that he was covering, it was in who he was. He was invested in you. Okay?
Going along with that, she was really approachable. You could felt comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Right, so they weren't sitting up on their high horse, behind their desk with all their stuff on it. You could go behind the desk and talk to them, right? Okay? Give me a couple more. Somebody over here. Yeah, man, go ahead. Okay. So the relationship extended beyond the classroom. Okay, cool. Yeah, William Ward, he was a pithy sayings writer, he said this: the mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, but the great teacher inspires. So I've got a couple of, you guys all said some good things, teachers who pay special attention to their students' interests, teachers who cultivate a learning spirit, and maybe a teacher kind of like you were saying, Alex, who's their personal example of their character is just really influential to you. So I've got a couple examples of some inspirational teachers. Anybody know who these people are? Helen Keller and her teacher. You guys know her teacher's name? I heard somebody say it, I think. Anne Sullivan. Anne Sullivan broke through the isolation of Helen Keller's deafness and blindness. She basically could not, Helen Keller could not communicate in any way. She could not be communicated to until Anne Sullivan came along. And she allowed the girl to blossom as she learned to communicate. And Helen Keller later became like a very politically active person and a speaker, amazingly enough. That's an example of an inspirational teacher. You guys know who these people are?
It's a very...
And
Plato.
And Plato, yes. So which one's which? Who's the teacher? Who's the student?
Yeah, Plato's the teacher.
Aristotle.
Plato was the teacher?
Aristotle is
Yeah. Plato was the teacher, and Aristotle was the student. So the old guy is Plato, and Aristotle is the young guy. This is a famous painting by Raphael, but listen to this, stay with me. Plato laid the very foundations of Western philosophy and science. He founded the Academy. You guys have heard of the Academy. It was like the great Greek educational system. It's one of the first organized educational systems in history. And then he taught Aristotle, whose writings would cover physics, biology, zoology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, linguistics, politics, and government. And his writings would constitute the first comprehensive system of Western philosophy. That is an influential teacher. That is an inspirational teacher. Yeah, go.
Alexander the Great.
There he is. There we go. So we see the chain, right? Plato teaches Aristotle. Aristotle passes his information on to none other than Alexander the Great, who conquered most of the known world before his death at the age of, anybody know?
It was 20...
You're like right, yeah, 32. He died at 32. He became a legendary as a classical hero like Achilles. He's featured prominently in the history and myth of Greek and non-Greek cultures. And he became the measure against which military leaders compared themselves. Listen, military academies throughout the world still teach his tactics. Okay, he's often ranked among the world's most influential people of all time, along with his teacher, Aristotle. Although apparently between here and there, Aristotle got younger, I guess. So I'm not sure how that works, but anyway, that's just an artist's impression. I've got one other example of an inspirational teacher. Can you pull up the first video there, the inspirational teachers? This is what I think of when I think of an inspirational teacher, although I'm going to give you the bad teacher before the good teacher. So there might be a little, it might have done, there you go. You guys know this movie? I'll get out of the way. I love this part.
Has a ponytail.
Amanda Thripp.
Yes, Miss Trunchbull.
What are those?
What's what, Miss Trunchbull?
Hanging down by your ears.
You mean like pigtails?
Are you a pig, Amanda?
No, Miss Trunchbull.
Do I allow pigs in my school?
My mommy thinks they're sweet.
Your mommy is a twit.
Oh.
Chop those off before school tomorrow, or I will cover. But! But! Did you say but? Here we go. What? Definitely. I'll give you but.
Good loss! Take sweet release! Think she'll make the fence? Can we call one?
Get to class before I throw you all in a choking.
Lavender. What's my teacher like?
Run, run, run! Faster! Get in!
So those are non-inspirational
Quickly.
teacher.
But Matilda's teacher
Turn it up.
is one of those remarkable people who appreciates every single child for who she or he is.
Let's get these up for you, Miss Honey.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, listen up, everybody. We have a new student with us today. This is Matilda Wormwood. I'd like you to sit over here with Lavender. Now, you all remember how scary your first days at school were, so I'd like you to be especially nice to Matilda and make her feel welcome, all right? Could you get her workbook for her, please?
Yes, Miss Honey.
You can sit down.
Miss Honey was a wonderful teacher and a friend to everyone. But her life was not as simple and beautiful as it seemed. Miss Honey had a deep, dark secret. Though it caused her great pain, she did not let it interfere with her teaching.
Well, Matilda, you've come on a very good day because we're going to review everything that we've learned so far. Now, it's all right if you don't understand any of this because you're brand new. But if you do know an answer, just raise your hand, okay? All right. We've been working on our 2 times tables. Would anyone like to demonstrate? Okay. Let's do some together. 2 times 4 is?
8.
2 times 6 is?
12.
2 times 9 is?
18.
Excellent. You've been practicing. Pretty soon you'll be able to do any multiplication, whether it's 2 times 7?
14.
Very good. Or 13 times 379.
4,927.
4,927.
Beg your pardon?
That's the answer. 13 times 379. 4,927.
Her brain is not calculated.
It is. Matilda, you know how to multiply big numbers?
I read this book last year in mathematics at the library.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything. But lately I've been reading Chickens. Charles Dickens. I could read him every day.
So could I.
Is that her daughter? Yeah.
All right, everyone. Wait, wait. Got you over there.
I forget.
Let's start with section 3.
All right, so Miss Honey might not necessarily be Plato, right? Like she didn't influence Western philosophy, but like there's an inspirational teacher, right? She recognizes, you know, that maybe she doesn't actually teach Matilda anything in the scene because Matilda like knows everything there is to know apparently, but she recognizes that Matilda likes to learn and is an inspiration to her, and you know, there's a whole other, you know, at the end of the story she ends up adopting her and all this kind of stuff. So anyway.
I was gonna read the movie.
Oh, sorry. Although, anyway, I think it's really ironic that Danny DeVito is doing the narrating when he's the father. Because, you know, the father is like a jerk to her and everything. Anyway, he's narrating the story as well as being the jerk of a father. But anyway, so the first thing here, we talk about teachers being inspirational. It's easy to elevate their authority. So the first way we practice idolatry is by we elevate their authority. And the first way we do this is over other teachers. So 57.5% of teenagers who were polled say that their worst school memories revolve around specific teachers. Okay? That's you know, more than half of the students who were polled say that their worst school memories revolve around certain teachers, right? The Trunchbulls of teachers, you know, the ones who take your aspirations by the pigtails and swing them over the fence, essentially. You know, we prioritize good teachers, you know, over bad teachers. It's really easy to do that, to recognize, you know, hey, I've got, you know, my English professor is really good, my math professor is bad, so I'm gonna, you know, pay more attention in this class than I am in this class. You know, and ultimately that's really to the detriment of our own grades. But we do that. You know, and here's the thing. It's problematic to do that because we don't get to pick and choose which authority figures we look up to. And this is what Paul had to say about that in Romans 13. We're gonna kind of camp out in this passage tonight. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. There's no, like, you know, provision for, you know, you get to resist the bad teacher. There's no caveat that says you get to prioritize your favorite teacher over, the teacher, the work that they ask you to do over the other teacher. You don't have the choice to do that. We elevate the authority of good teachers over bad teachers. Another way we do this, over our parents. We elevate our teacher's authority over our parents. And I think that, maybe that's really easy to do when, we have an especially inspirational teacher. We can kind of respect their opinions more than our parents. A couple ways I think this could play out. Your art teacher recognizes that you're really, you're gifted and you're doing a really good job, so they want you to join art club, which takes place after school on Thursdays, and that's the day that your mom has, work, and she needs you to babysit the children, the other children, and there can be a conflict there. And while it's not wrong to want to be part of art club by any means, if your parents are not, down with art club just because of the scheduling or for whatever reason, like we can, be frustrated with that. We can elevate, the priority that the teacher has over our parents' priority. Teachers can encourage more like liberal viewpoints than your parents, especially if like your parents are Christian and your teachers are not. And I'm not talking like politically liberal. I'm talking like morally liberal. And the problem isn't necessarily that you shouldn't be open-minded. Although, as we know from 1 John, that open-mindedness should always be seasoned with reasonable doubt. Like we test what we hear against the Word of God. So the problem isn't necessarily that you shouldn't be open-minded to what your teachers have to teach you. It's that you shouldn't allow what is taught to you at school or or church or wherever you have another teacher to supersede the authority that your parents have. You guys with me on that? Like, okay, cool. I don't want to beat it to death. And teachers can be extremely inspirational, but the problem here is that when you elevate your teacher's authority over your parents, you're forgetting that your parents are the primary authority that has been placed in your life. They're the primary authority which has been placed in your life. Until you are an of-age adult and out of their house, they are the principal authority that's placed over you. And I say out of the house because I hear a lot of people when they're 18 talk about how they're an adult and they can do what they want, but they're still living under their parents' roof. Okay. The definition of being an adult who can do what they want, I see some laughing over there. You guys with me on that? The definition of being an adult who can do what he wants is, or she, what they want, is somebody who is providing for themselves, who is outside of the authority of their parents, and not living under their roof, not being dependent upon them. Even in that regard, even Christian teachers, me, Pastor Phil, we only supplement. We don't override the authority that your parents have. Like what we say and teach should support what your parents are already teaching at home. That's not always going to be the case. But we don't have authority over your parents. Your primary authority is your parents. Listen, if you have a rough home life, especially if you have a rough home life, whether it's with one parent, both parents, whatever it might be, it's easy to respect the teacher or the other, any other authority figure who invests in you, who is inspirational to you. It's easy to prioritize what they say and think, and feel more attached to them than you necessarily do to your own parents. If that's the case, like, there's a couple of scenarios. In the instance of a parent who doesn't properly understand the Bible or has no desire to understand the Bible, you still have the opportunity to submit to them even in their error and demonstrate the love of Christ. And I say opportunity purposefully. I know that's like some of you might be in that place where your parents aren't Christians or their understanding of the Word of God is not necessarily where it should be. And that feels like a really hard thing to submit to them because you know that they're, you read the Bible and you're like, well, that's not really what the Bible says. And it's really difficult. It's still an opportunity to submit. It's not a chore. It is a responsibility, but it's also an opportunity. You demonstrate the love of Christ to your parents by submitting to them, even when they're wrong, when you choose to do that willingly. In the instance of parents who have different priorities than you do, don't presume that their priorities are wrong just because they don't line up with yours. Recognize that parents have a wisdom that you might not necessarily have yet. They have an insight that you don't have, not because you're dumb and they're smart, but because they've been around on this earth longer than you. They have a little bit of insight from experience. Recognize that their priorities aren't wrong, any more than maybe yours aren't even wrong either. But be willing to evaluate and look at yourself and honestly say, well, maybe my parents have a reason for not wanting me to do this at this time, or just not wanting me to do this in general. In the instance that your parents just don't inspire you the way some of your teachers do, it's another opportunity. You get to be gracious. You get to be patient, and you get to be submissive in other ways. Like, maybe some of you have a parent who works 12-hour shifts and you never see them. It's really easy to be more inspired, more influenced by teachers and other authority figures that you interact with than your parents in some ways. And that's not, I'm not beating on mom or dad there, right? Like, that's a mom or a dad who works really, really hard to provide for the family. But at the same time as, that's a struggle, you still have the opportunity to be respectful, to be gracious and submissive to them. And finally, and this is another topic, and we won't go into this tonight, but in the instance of emotional, physical, or even sexual abuse, there's an opportunity there for you to get help, right? There's a special provision for protection. So we're talking about a family who is maybe there's like this differences of opinions. We're not talking about abuse in this scenario, but in that case, if that's where you are, please get help. That is not a come to me, come to Pastor Phil, come to Pastor Jack. Like, there's no reason for you to sit under that, and there's a way out of that. Though that's just another conversation. I don't want to go into that right now. But if you do have a rough home life in any way, it's easy to fall into this category of elevating your teacher's authority over your parents. And last one, and you guys know this one, we can elevate our teacher's authority over God's. We value their opinions more than biblical truth. So, show of hands. How many of you have teachers who are atheists? Show of hands. Okay, right. How many of you have teachers who, maybe they probably don't talk about this in the classroom too much, but who maybe are pro-choice or pro-abortion? Okay. How many of you have teachers who are evolutionists? Okay. How many of you have any of that, fill in the blank, but that teacher is also a really fantastic teacher? Okay. A person's views don't necessarily change the fact that they're good at what they do. And so in the case of a teacher who is teaching you something that is directly in contradiction to the Word of God, you gotta figure out how to be submissive and respectful to them even in that scenario. But what happens in this case when we begin to elevate their authority over God's, we begin to look at the fact that, man, it's a great teacher, and I love this this individual as a person. Maybe they're not so wrong to think the way they do. Maybe they have a good reason for it, right? If we begin to justify their life choices, their personal decisions, their opinions, because we recognize that they're really an influential teacher. They do a lot for me. They teach me a lot. And so we can kind of begin to give their opinion the authority where God's Word is the authority, right? And that's a challenge. That's a challenge. We've got to figure out how to be submissive to our teachers even when they're teaching things that are wrong. This is problematic to elevate their authority over God's because God is our ultimate authority, and Paul talks about that in that same passage, right? Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. God is sovereign over human authority. He's in control over human authority. There's no one in your life who is in authority over you that God has not placed in. You don't believe in coincidences, okay? God is sovereign. He's in control. And so therefore, to elevate your teacher's authority over God's is to practice a form of idolatry. It's to idolize their relationship. So we do it in these three ways, and we can summarize by saying, I idolize my teachers when I elevate their authority over God's and my parents. But the opposite side of that, we can challenge their authority. And you guys are like, how is that idolizing them if we're putting them down? We challenge them because of that family is in just a terrible place. I idolize who I want my teachers to be when I challenge their authority. I recognize, I have an idea of what a good teacher is, and I think I wish that my teacher was that, and so now I'm idolizing this and I'm being disrespectful to my teacher in turn. There's a couple ways that this could play out. How many of you homeschoolers are taking college classes right now? In class, you're in the classroom? Just you two guys, okay. How many of you, so Mary or Michael, have you had fellow classmates come in like once every month or so and then get frustrated with the teacher for not being more clear about instructions or things like that? Michael's nodding. You haven't experienced that?
I haven't noticed.
Okay. All right. I just could not believe. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty studious guy. I did well at school, and I would be speechless when like this guy would come to class the first day of class, get the syllabus, and then never come back until the last day of class to turn in his final project. And you're just like, how does that work, right? And so when it comes to college and the students are kind of they're paying for their own tuition, they kind of feel like they've got the right to come in and out as they go, which may or may not be true. But there's this expectation that they have that the teacher should cater to them, right? That their schedule should be allowed to be prominent, and the teacher should like adjust deadlines around that. And maybe words are hard. Maybe or maybe not. You guys have that in your classrooms right now. I mean, I'm sure you guys probably have. And maybe you guys do this. I would never assume that any of you guys would do this, but maybe you think that deadlines should be flexible because you had all this stuff going on and you didn't get your paper in on time, or you didn't have time to study, so you failed the test, right? But there's an expectation that teachers should cater to us, to our learning ability, to our interests. Deadlines should be up to me. I should get free extensions. Tests shouldn't be cumulative. I should get a page of notes when I take a test. That should be allowed. If I fail, it's the teacher's fault for not explaining it better. That is the attitude of universities today. If I fail, it's the teacher's fault for not explaining it better. And I've got another clip here. You want to pull up that second video? This is that attitude is so prominent that that it's the teacher's fault, it's the school's fault, it's never the child's fault. That this school in Australia actually put this as their answering machine message. So pull this up and make sure the volume is turned up there. I think there's subtitles to read it, but this is an Australian school's actual answering machine message, and it may or may not still be up today. Okay. We got volume? Okay. So they implemented a policy requiring students and parents to be responsible for their children's absences and missing homework. Alright, so the students are clearly at fault here.
Hello, you have reached the automated answering service of your school. In order to assist you in connecting to the right staff member, please listen to all the options before making a selection. To lie about why your child is absent, press 1. To make excuses for why your child did not do his homework, press 2. To complain about what we do, press 3. To swear at staff members, press 4. To ask why you didn't get information that has already been enclosed in your newsletter and several flyers that have been mailed to you, press 5. If you want us to raise your child, press 6. If you want to reach out and touch, slap, or hit someone, press 7. To request another teacher for the third time this year, press 8. To complain about bus transportation, press 9. To complain about school lunches, press 0. If you realize this is the real world and your child must be accountable and responsible for his or her own behavior, classwork and homework, and that it's not the teacher's fault for your child's lack of effort, hang up and have a nice day. If you want this in another language, move to a country that speaks it.
What was the result of the suit?
I don't think it says anything. It would be interesting to find out, Michael. Listen. Education, we have this expectation, parents have this expectation sometimes, students have this expectation that it's the school's responsibility to educate me. And while it is, there is a responsibility for teachers to do their work, to give, quality assignments, to grade effectively, it's not all one way. It's a two-way street. There's an effort that has to be put into it. We'll move on from there. So here's the thing though. What do I do when my teacher, or my entire school for that matter, is terrible, right? I've got a teacher who just, and this is, especially prominent in community colleges. You'll find teachers that are just, they're adjuncts. They're just there. They're sitting at their desks and they don't really do a whole lot. But what do I do when I've got a teacher who just doesn't care, who's not involved, who's not invested? Well, number one, and this may seem obvious, but I think it bears the reminder. Number one, we have to recognize, again, that God is sovereign over even imperfect human authority. Again, He has placed in your life teachers and authority figures for a purpose. There is no authority except from God. Whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. By the way, let's read on a little bit. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who's in authority? Then do what's good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. In other words, if you want to please the rulers, the people who are in authority over you, your teachers, your parents, then do what they ask you to do. But he uses the example of this bearing a sword. So, there's an executioner in this time for political enemies and things like that. But your parents or your teachers have the right to bring consequences if you don't do what's required of you. Don't be afraid unless you're doing what's wrong, he's saying. For he, that is the one carrying the sword, or the ruler, or the whatever else, he is the servant of God, and an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Let's move down a little bit. The authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Listen to this. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. There is a responsibility that we have to give to the authorities that are over us, the respect that they are due. And by the way, this is an earthly philosophy, that respect is for those who deserve it, not for those who demand it. That is a worldly philosophy, that we only respect those who are worthy of respect. Outside Magazine, which I don't know if that's even in circulation anymore, it often features stories about people who risk their lives in order to establish a reputation for themselves. I've got a couple examples here. Larry Walters took a flight in a lawn chair, suspended by 42 large helium-filled balloons. You guys heard the story? Upon reaching an altitude of 16,000 feet, he began popping the balloons with a pellet gun. He descended to the ground safely. He's got a record for that. Frenchman Jean-Luc Antony skis down rocks. Skis down rocks. It seems like a really bad idea, but he does it. In 1987, he set a world record of 61 miles per hour riding a monoski down a rocky slope in France. Get this. Because braking is impossible, the resourceful Antony erected a cardboard retaining wall at the bottom of the run and smashed into it. He survived. Last one. Reg Miller, age 72, is the reigning world champion of, and I quote, ferret legging. Ferret legging. Ferret legging is a contest involving the tying of and this is an exact quote from the rules, the tying of a competitor's trousers at the ankles and the subsequent insertion into those trousers of a couple of particularly vicious, fur-coated, foot-long carnivores called ferrets. The brave contestant's belt is then pulled tight, and he proceeds to stand in front of the judges as long as he can, while these animals with claws like hypodermic needles and teeth like number 16 carpet tacks try to get out. This is a competition. This is not I'm not making this up. Reg Miller, aforementioned age 72, Reg Miller holds the world record at 5 hours and 26 minutes. He had ferrets in his pants for 5 hours and 26 minutes. Okay.
Stood there for 5 hours.
Listen. Not everyone we are required to respect is worthy of our respect.
But I do think it's sitting in for 5 hours with ferrets in his pants is worthy of respect.
Yeah, no, I don't have any respect for a man who puts ferrets down his pants for 5 hours. But as a Christian, respect is something that we give to those who are in authority, whether or not they've earned it. Whether or not they've earned our respect, whether they've done their job or not, I'm required as a Christian to respect them. If they're in authority over me, I'm required to respect them.
Bless you.
And listen, you guys are going to encounter all kinds of teachers through the course of the rest of high school and college. That some who are good and some who are terrible. Some are good and some who are terrible. You take the good with the bad. and can I just challenge you guys? Like, so when it comes to like, you have a teacher who's an evolutionist who gives you an assignment to write a paper about why, evolution is the predominant theory and why it makes sense. Instead of standing up in class and just saying, no, I refuse to do this because I don't agree with it, do the assignment, do the work, and have the opportunity to say, you know what, I was submissive, I did the work that was done, I did a good job with it, I did my research, I disagree with this, but I did the assignment, I did it humbly, I did it on time, and frankly, when you have the opportunity to study somebody else's viewpoint and understand why they think the way they think, that's a valuable resource, right? So you have a much better opportunity to have an impact on your teacher for Christ when you do what's required of you than when you stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that because it's against what I believe. Maybe that seems counterintuitive, but I would argue that you have a much greater opportunity to be an example to your teacher in that way than you do if you just refuse to do it because it's against your faith. You have the opportunity there. Anyway, that's a tangent. So we have to recognize that God is sovereign, even over imperfect human authority. We give respect to those who are in authority, whether or not they've earned it. Number two, we are responsible for our actions. Look, this is a little bit later in Romans. Paul says this: I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them. For such persons do not serve our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. For your obedience is known to all, so that I rejoice over you. But I want you to be wise as to what is good and innocent as to what is evil. There's a responsibility here for you to arm yourself. Paul doesn't say, at least in this passage, that the teachers who are teaching false things are going to incur judgment. We know they will. But Paul, talks about the fact that we have a responsibility to arm ourselves with maturity. We have a responsibility to know what is right and what is wrong. He says avoid them. You don't really have the choice to do that, especially in the classroom. You kind of have to be there and do the things that are required of you. But there's a responsibility for us to recognize when there's false teaching, and respond in meekness and wisdom when the opportunity arises. And again, kind of in the same vein as what I was just talking about with the assignments, like sometimes we have to determine whether there's wisdom in responding at all, right? Like sometimes your teacher is going to say something in front of the class that you just, is completely flies in the face of scriptural truth. Sometimes the better option to in that scenario is not to say anything at all, and then you have the opportunity afterwards to maybe talk to your classmates and say, hey, what'd you guys think about that? Now you've got the opportunity to talk about it, and maybe you have, you can engage with them on what truth actually is. And don't, not like, oh, the teacher said something terrible, but like, this is an idea, let's talk about it, right? Sometimes, especially I think in our day and age, when we stand up and talk about the things that we're against, like our world is really sensitive to the fact that Christians are against things. It's much more palatable, much more acceptable to them to have a honest conversation where you're not standing up and shaking your fist and raising a picket sign, right? It's a much more humble way to approach the topic than to pop your hand up and say something. Now, that doesn't mean that all the time is, maybe there is an opportunity for you to do that, and so that requires discretion. That's exactly what this talk is talking about. Be wise as to what is good and innocent as to what is evil. So there's humility attached to that, and there's respect attached to that. So set the example for two different things. Set the example of being respectful of your teachers outside of class, and set the example of being diligent outside of class. Again, those I think you have a much better, and we can talk about this if you want later, but I think you have a much better opportunity to be an example for Christ and share the gospel by being diligent and doing your work and on time and hard, being a hard worker and being respectful to your teachers, to their faces and outside of the classroom. Maybe even then just directly talking about Jesus. What was it? St. Francis of Assisi said, share the gospel, if necessary, use words, right? Your conduct is as much evidence of Christ working in your life as your words are. And in fact, it's more so because it's easier to say stuff than it is to live it out, right? So, here's the thing. Don't badmouth your teachers. Be diligent, and you'll set an example. your peers are going to tend to buck authority because our world bucks authority. Everything about America really is do it your own way, challenge the givens. We watched the Audi commercial last week with the kid who jumped in the pool after eating the sandwich when he was supposed to wait an hour. And that's encouraged. Challenge authority. Do what's right for you. Authority figures, whether they're teachers, coaches, parents, you fill in the blank. Whatever authority figures are there, they've been given to you by God to instruct you and in many ways to protect you. And I think that's best illustrated in this Proverbs passage. We'll skip down to the bottom because we're running short on time, but this is Solomon writing and warning a young man about avoiding lust, about avoiding sexual contact with a woman, especially adultery. But he says this, he says, listen to me at the beginning, and then he says in verse 10, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your laborers go to the house of a foreigner. And at the end of your life you groan, when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline. My heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. And again, this is specifically about avoiding sexual sin, but I think the same is true that when you're not diligent, you're not respectful, you don't want to hear what authority has to say, you still end up in the same place, for a different reason, but you end up in the same place. I wish that I had been more respectful. I wish I had been, hello. Everybody watch out for balls coming over the top. I wish I had been more respectful. I wish I'd learned more when I had the opportunity to. So real quick, and then we'll be done. Our discussion question tonight was, why are you in school? So give me a couple reasons. What do you guys say? Why are you personally? Why are you in school? Give me some page. What's your reason for being in school?
My dad doesn't let me drop out.
Your dad doesn't let you drop out. Okay, Nick, what's your reason for being in school?
Made to by law.
Made to by law. I don't know your name. Dan, give me a reason for being in school. You want a job. Luke, what's your reason for being in school? You have to. Okay, I'm noticing a theme. Pastor Jack, what's your reason for being in school, or was your reason for being in school?
I'm done.
You're done. He just wants to rub it in. Jeremy, what's your reason for being in school? To learn. Good. I'm not in school anymore. What was my reason for being in school? I was a weird kid. I liked school. I enjoyed school. All right. The top reasons for going to school, all of you are kind of saying the same thing, right? But here are some top reasons why people go to school. My friends are there. My parents make me. It sounds fun. Not many people say that. I'm too young to have a job, or I want to get a job. I want to go to prom so I can get to college, get a job, and make money. I didn't make this up, by the way. How about this one? There are a lot of cute girls there. There are a lot of cute guys there, right? I want to be in the marching band. Anybody say that? I want to be in the marching band? No?
That's Zach.
Yeah, you want to be in the marching band?
Actually,
You want to be in the
Zach's
marching band? Yeah? All right. Or the football team needs me. Listen. A big reason that we go is simply because it's required, right? You can't get out of it. You got to go. And frankly, school isn't much fun. We have a tendency to have that punch in and punch out mentality, and that's exactly what the rest of life is about. I'm sorry to tell you, but you are never going to get to the place where there is not work to be done.
Unless you go in sales.
Yeah, unless you do that. But if we're not careful, that's the pattern that we set for ourselves later in life. So a huge part of doing a good job in school, making a difference in school, is being diligent, getting the work done, and by being respectful to your parents. And again, or to your teachers, excuse me, because that's an instrumental way that you can demonstrate to your peers the love of Christ. Don't be this. Don't elevate your teacher's authority over God's or your parents. Don't challenge your teacher's authority. Don't idolize who you want them to be. Find that middle ground between the two, where you have a healthy respect for your teachers, but you are submissive to the things that they ask you to do, the assignments they ask you to do, the homework, whatever it might be. Find that middle ground. Have a godly respect for your teachers. Let's pray, and then you guys are free to go.